Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Nielsen-Ott, and I am on the Sustainability Committee. And on behalf of the Sustainability Committee, I'd like to welcome you all to our Sustainability Contest for Fall 2015. I said the word sustainability a lot of times in that. Welcome. It's a long word. I type it many, many times a day. So again, welcome everyone. We are so happy to have so many of you in attendance and so many student presenters today for the contest. How the contest will run today, we will have our keynote by Anthony Corso in just a few moments, and then we will have an announcement from the president of SAFE, Kristen Haig, and then we will break up into two rooms. So half of the presentations will be in here, and half of the presentations are going to take place in 123A down and around the corner. And so the presenters know which room they should be in. So if you have any questions, ask and let me know, and I will send you in the right direction. I would like to introduce our judges for today. We have Laura McHugh Newport from Food Services. We have Dr. Timone, our interim president. We have Paul Resnick from English Language and English Humanities and Language Studies. Something, English and some other things. He teaches things about books. And we have Jen Scobie from Math Science and Engineering and Kristen Jacobson-Flex from Math Science and Engineering. And we will also have David Thompson from Social Sciences that will be coming. So thank you all for volunteering to judge. And I would also like to thank my co-chair on the Sustainability Committee, Troy Hatterman, as he'll be kind of running things in the other room. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anthony Corso. Anthony Corso is a former ICC student and employee and a Peoria native, and now he is the Chief Innovation Officer for the City of Peoria. And today he'll be talking about building resilient communities. So please welcome Anthony Corso.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to wander around a little bit. By all means, I have a lot packed in here and I could talk for hours, but we're going to try to keep this short and sweet. But I would love for you, if you have a burning question, to kind of throw up your hand, and we'll try to address it in the process. I'm going to try to spend maybe 15, 20 minutes kind of giving you a little background, a little story of what I'm working on now, how I'm taking the sustainability discussion as really systems thinking and applying it, trying to apply it in the real world with my work with the City of Peoria. So does that sound reasonable to everybody? Okay, we'll get some nods. That's pretty good. Okay, that's good. So, some of these are details just for background. Basically, I'm the director of an innovation team funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, and it's based on a 4-step process that you will see in design work, that you'll see in change management, that you'll see everywhere. It's basically understand the problem, look at what other people are doing, ask people on the ground, people of all walks of life, the usual and the unusual suspects, what opportunities and challenges they see. And this applies to on any discipline that you could look at. This is a pretty solid way to approach it. And what we're doing is then my team works to kind of co-develop a plan for solving a problem. And then we help deliver that plan. And when we're not, with metrics, and when we're not quite accomplishing what we want, we help adapt. It's called performance management in the big, boring corporate world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the framework for that. Basically, you guys probably hear the word innovation a lot. How many people know what, have their own definition in their head? So for me, it was always, a new idea that adds value. But I think I always had context in mind. And so it can certainly be, and in many cases is, an adapted or an old idea that's applied in a new context and then institutionalized and made part of the practice. But I want to give you a little bit more background on that from a systems approach that really directs this innovation work we're doing into the realm of sustainability. And so you probably can't see that from the seats that are far back. This is a study that was done and released in 2005. So for many of you, that was a long, long time ago, about the waves of innovation as we've tracked them over the last, since 1785. So again, if my laser works here, we've got iron, water power, mechanization, textiles. So we've got the waves of the Industrial Revolution, waves of innovation. we are at that sixth wave up here, which has sustainability, radical resource productivity, whole system design, biomimicry, green chemistry, industrial ecology. These are terms many of you have heard before. The point I'm making is that innovation has often been uncoupled from its impacts on larger issues. And when you optimize something in a system, and you optimize something in isolation, you tend to pessimize the system. So we come up with these great solutions, these great mechanisms, these great programs, and we didn't think about all the tangential and all the related impacts. And so what we're doing now in this sixth wave of innovation is really starting to think about, that's a great idea that could really improve quality of life for someone. How does it impact everyone and everything else in that larger system to which it's connected? Does that make sense? Everybody still with me? I know there are a lot of big words on the page. So this is one of the things that was inspiring to me early on in my career. This is a rendering that was done by a design firm I worked at for a few years. Hey, Ed. This is the Illinois River Valley, a depiction of a snapshot in time of how people lived on the landscape and how different sources of energy and water, the hydrologic cycle, everything interacted with one another. And it's just to give you a background, because those of you who are from here and see or have been in the Illinois River, this was once, no more than 150 years ago, crystal clear, still flowing river, fed by seeps and springs and teeming with wildlife, with a biodiversity rate, not seen anywhere really outside of the Amazon rainforest at this day and time. So that's a lot to kind of swallow, that we've transformed the world so much in that relatively short period of time. And mostly because we were making these incremental improvements but not understanding how they were negatively impacting other aspects. And so now we're trying to look at it more holistically to solve problems. So here's our first assignment as the innovation team in the city of Peoria. We have a solution that was very valuable up until about 1930, which was to take water off of streets and water from sewers eventually away from people. So there wasn't so much cholera and diphtheria and other challenges. The challenge is that with a combined sewer system, when you get a major rainfall, or even not a major rainfall or snow melt or something like that, you can overwhelm the system and end up dumping raw sewage into the Illinois River. So like 700 plus communities across the country, we have a combined sewer system, and it has combined sewer overflows. So this is clearly a violation of the Clean Water Act, and something that cities are working, and the city of Peoria has been working for years to try to resolve. But it was a systems failure, right? So we weren't thinking holistically, and now it's very expensive to come back and fix the problem much later. So that was the joking term to get it out to the public was there's poop in the water. And so we need to solve the problem because it's a public health and environmental threat. Those of you who are from Peoria or not, this little dark gray shaded area right here is the combined sewer area. That is roughly 8 square miles of legacy neighborhoods in the city of Peoria, the south side, the central business district, the near north side, the east bluff and the west bluff. That approximately 8 square mile area housed about the same population that the whole 50 plus square mile area the city does now, just to show how we've actually changed the way that we live on the landscape, and not necessarily for the better. How do you think, what do you think spurred some of that less dense development? Anybody have any ideas? Yeah, we're all driving cars around now. So great advancement, right? But think about some of the downsides of what that's done. And most importantly, I think if you're from Peoria or elsewhere, and there's not really a city that's immune to this, we found that now that we're well into the post-World War II development phase of suburbanization and automobile-centric development, we have infrastructure that's coming to the end of its useful life that we can't afford to maintain, repair, and replace. And so this is not unique to Peoria, but it was an experiment. And some of the outcomes are less than desirable. So we went through our whole process. This is just some of the highlights. What we did to kind of frame our problem for the city is we had this very technical problem, the combined sewer overflows, and we know that there are technical solutions to that. But the goal of this team and the innovation within that is to leverage a solution that also starts to solve other problems. And so a lot of the same policies and practices over that same rough amount of time led to a major socioeconomic decline, disinvestment in communities, and other things like that. And so our goal is to solve this technical problem in a way that starts to chip away at some of the socioeconomic issues, if you will. Everybody still with me? Okay. So we're proposing doing that with 100% green infrastructure. Does anybody know what green infrastructure is? Anybody want to guess? Plants, trees, stuff that soaks water into the ground. The picture that I showed of the Illinois River Valley, there's a diagram that showed precipitation. And 90% of that water that fell out of the sky in these events went right into the ground. We were in infiltration-based hydrology. As we build out cities, roofs, parking lots, things like that, we became a surface flow hydrology. So we kind of bypassed biological processes. We didn't really allow nature to help us clean up the mess we were making. And we created incredible regimes of kind of piping water into waterways where the water fluctuation was incredibly intense. Anybody know what that does? Have we seen creek beds in your backyard? Or, so we've undermined an entire system with the way that we just manage the water alone. Anyway, huge opportunity to start to bring kind of a new urban ecology or hydrology back into the urban environment. And we're not the first city, certainly not the first city to use green infrastructure to start to solve stormwater issues and things like that. We're probably the first city to do it to solve 100% of our combined sewer overflow issue. And the interesting thing there is we have the soils and the technology and the street widths to actually use our public right-of-way to pull enough water out of the storm or keep enough water out of the stormwater system to solve the problem without actually having to dig it up. One other thing I'll throw in, this is actually going to be more cost-effective than the gray infrastructure solution of adding pipes and tanks. And it also, I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I won't get into this too much, but you can certainly reduce urban heat island effects. You can improve air quality. You can do all these other things that actually have a monetary value. But what my team did is we pulled together 7 items that we wanted to kind of focus on in terms of the co-benefits of this green infrastructure and try to leverage those to see how many other things we could start to move the needle on. So there are connections between people and places, safe and accessible transportation infrastructure, since we are, again, using the streets themselves to solve the problem. Crime mitigation, we can talk about that. People say, well, how do you mitigate crime with green infrastructure? Public health and wellness, ecological health and productivity, that's one of maybe the more obvious benefits of it. Local jobs and workforce training opportunities, and certainly the synergies that you have with the message that sends, the investment in real estate, and the synergies you get with economic development. So we all want more jobs, more local jobs, more jobs in the local economy. That's a way to do it. So how do we connect people and places? Well, we actually can create this physical infrastructure, these streets that we already have. And as if you think about it, people have an innate tendency to follow the flow of water, to follow things that are legible that they can see. And so we can make streets more walkable. We can actually make hydrologic cycles visible. And it really changes the way that people interact with the street. And it makes it, street trees alone on a city street anywhere in this region make that street more walkable. They make it more comfortable. There's a psychological impact, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But they also create spaces that foster interaction. You'll find that community gardens or public parks or well-maintained public parks, they actually create stronger social bonds. And that impacts public health as well. So this is an example, the Indianapolis Cultural Trail. Anybody ever been there? Have you seen the trail? Have you been on it? Okay, so this is a great example. It incorporates connections between these civic and cultural amenities like museums and libraries and schools. It incorporates public art. It has green infrastructure and native landscaping throughout. It's a multimodal trail, so it is focused on increasing mobility and access for people that aren't maybe in automobiles, whereas the rest of the city is really tends to prioritize automobile traffic. And so you get people just excited about it and more engaged. They're meeting people that you don't necessarily stop and roll down your window to say hello to the person next to you at the stoplight. Well, here people actually will stop and talk to someone that's looking at a piece of public art or riding by on a bicycle. More traditional ways, so this is a school in Portland where they're learning about the connection between the water cycle and they're actually connecting with the neighborhood at the same time. The next slide, another school in Portland where they're learning about native landscape, native plants to that region and its role in the hydrologic cycle. These are just making connections. This is by Push Buffalo. This is vacant lots in a socioeconomically declined neighborhood, and they're using the vacant lots to turn them into assets, a place where people can connect with one another, connect with green infrastructure, and try to build the social capacity of those neighborhoods to be a positive asset. The second one, how am I doing on time so far? Still? Okay, all right. So I'll go through these pretty quick. So anybody heard of complete streets? Anybody heard that term? We have one person here. Basically, it's a way to look at our streets and give equal access to make them accessible to folks in wheelchairs, to make them more accessible for pedestrians, for cyclists, for all modes of transport. So it's working its way through Congress. It certainly has some impacts on the state level already, and the city of Peoria has adopted a complete streets ordinance. So moving forward, we will have to look at and consider impacts on all of those modes of transport, not just the automobile, when we redesign or redo a street, or do a new street for that matter. So we can create these safe places that also kind of beautify streets and neighborhoods and can do all of these things at the same time and really start to do this. Is an example of, I think this is also a scheme for Portland that shows a dedicated bicycle lane, a mass transit lane, and then the interaction with pedestrian crosswalks. So there's traffic calming, there's dedicated kind of multimodal transportation options. There's all these things that kind of bring these things together in a safe way. So pedestrians on the sidewalk don't have to worry about speeding traffic or stepping across, 50 feet to cross from one side of the street to the other. It's all wrapped into the solution. And so these are the kinds of things that cities are starting to do with retrofits, especially in the urban core, because that's where they'll start. Do you have a question?
Any idea for bringing the streetcar back, the tram?
I wish. I mean, that getting public support for additional mass transportation is a tough one when you can get anywhere you need to get in 10 minutes. So our experts that came on October 2nd, one of the comments that was kind of interesting was Peoria really needs to work on getting some congestion. Yeah, I mean, we respond to kind of, there's the disconnect in the system. There's not the feedback to think, oh, well, maybe we should have a streetcar. There is some conversation about doing either a streetcar or, a dedicated kind of trolley line, like I think already exists, to connect maybe the warehouse district in downtown and in Bradley University. That was one of the routes of the old trolley line. So you could talk about why the old trams and trolleys got taken apart, because the automobile companies bought them all and dismantled them. Another way to describe a complete street is actually to tell you what it's not. You've all seen these, right? There's nowhere to walk, there's no sidewalk, there's a sidewalk to nowhere. There's a bus stop where no human could actually reside or hang out and wait for. And of course, if you're in a wheelchair and there's no ramps, no curb cuts. But certainly this is more and more important, especially to millennials and Gen Xers for that matter, but increasingly all ages. Safe and comfortable access via bicycle. So this person is cycling, but it's clearly not safe or comfortable for them to do so on the streets that they exist on. Really quickly, run through the rest of them. Reductions in crime. So there are some pretty straightforward things like actually designing landscapes where you have maintained sight lines and you delineate between public and private property. But the other side of that is that there are psychological, physiological impacts of exposure to green infrastructure, trees and landscapes, well-maintained landscapes, and it actually reduces aggression It's been shown to do a bunch of other things, including increase healing times or speed up healing times and things like that. So it turns out there's a lot of scientific information out there, especially in recent years, about the benefits of green infrastructure, but it does tend to, and Philadelphia was here talking about their data with their street trees and their green infrastructure projects. They've been tracking the reduction in crime, and it actually is a perfect correlation with the number of green infrastructure projects they implement. They're seeing a corresponding decrease in crime. It's not a silver bullet, but it certainly has positive impacts in crime mitigation. Any questions on that? There's those of you who have been to Manhattan, this is the High Line. This is the old elevated train track that was converted into a roughly 2-mile kind of walking, recreational track. It has food carts on it now. It has, by last measure, brought in about $2 billion in new revenue to Manhattan through just the people that are there to see it, or the businesses that have kind of expanded or gained new business due to proximity to it. It's a pretty amazing tool that showcases a lot of these. Health benefits, I talked about some of those already, but just having, and I'll show a survey here at the very end, which kind of ties it all together. So my team went out and met with folks from every community, folks that are living well below the poverty line. And we asked a lot of the same questions to all these people. And one of the answers that came up over and over again kind of surprised us. And it was people wanted to find a place, a safe and comfortable place to go walk, to actually go walk and go exercise and just get out in the air, no matter where they lived, what their walk of life or their income. And so the value of green infrastructure and these connections of green infrastructure in promoting public health and recreation and fitness, overall well-being, is well documented, and it's a very important piece as we start to again tie health and wellness, costs of healthcare, all these things back together to the design of our cities and how we're thinking about that. Okay, so anybody wants to dig deeper, the Growing Green, how green infrastructure can improve community livability and public health from 2012. There's certainly studies since then, but I think that's American Rivers. Yeah, American Rivers put out that report in 2012. That was, sorry. I was going to show you. Oh, that's fine. So ecological benefits, this is one I talk about a lot. This is Tanner Springs Park in Portland. This is a great example of green infrastructure that really creates some social significance. It is a fairly dense, this is the Pearl District in Portland, so it's a fairly well-to-do district. But what they did is they took native landscaping, they did stormwater management, they used public art. The history of this site was that it was a lake. It was filled in and became a rail yard. And they came back to redevelop this neighborhood, and they wanted to build on the history of it. So they've created a one-block park that serves a bunch of functions, including recreational opportunities. It manages the stormwater from the entire surrounding area. It includes a piece of public art, which you can kind of see in the background. There's an undulating wall of old rails from the railroad. And in between it, an artist created little glass sculptures of all the native flora and fauna that existed on the site. And so this was, again, taking all of these things together, but an example of leveraging green infrastructure to create a very, very powerful, very successful space that contributes to all these things, these social bonds in the community, these stormwater management benefits, things like that. So this is more of along the lines of what we're looking at right now. These are stormwater management, planters along the roadway. Another example from Portland. I'm going to jump into another big project we're working on, which is one of the additional co-benefits. Because we're doing green infrastructure instead of a 2-mile giant tank underground, we can use local labor to do the work, but we can also hire or do workforce development with folks, underserved communities within the combined sewer area to develop a workforce core for them to learn about horticulture, green infrastructure maintenance, and do some of the aesthetic maintenance work, plant replacement, things like that. So we're really looking at that as a huge opportunity to kind of move the needle on access to opportunity for the opportunity youth segment, like the 18 to 24-year-old, 16 to 24-year-old groups within these neighborhoods. This is the team. I took the city manager and some city staff to Philadelphia to meet the Power Corps crews, the Power Corps PHL crews there, which is a workforce development corps focused on green infrastructure maintenance for the city of Philadelphia. So I think we're in 3 crews right now that do that. They also, as it turns out, are the best champions of really the best public face and PR for the green infrastructure campaign. It's a peer-to-peer, neighbor-to-neighbor focus, and so they've been extremely important and successful in actually the public perception and the success and the ownership within these communities of that green infrastructure. Because they could just not care about it and put garbage in it, but instead they really care for it because it's the people from the community that are part of the solution. And then the economic development side, I'm going to talk maybe a little bit about the Indianapolis Cultural Trail again. In addition to all these other benefits, and in concert with, you tend to get synergies in redevelopment. So whether it's a private redevelopment, a public redevelopment, or a public-private partnership, in the Cultural Trail, they ended up with another $1 billion in investment, and there's a couple kind of interesting things about it. Of the folks that lived within 150 feet, I think it was, maybe it was 500 feet of the trail itself, that owned property that lived there, 25% of them said that it was one of the key issues that determined whether or not they would live there or not, was access to this cultural trail, access to this linear connection of green infrastructure and public art. And then here's the one I told you about, so I already stole my own thunder with this, but in terms of their survey of the users of this green infrastructure trail, the 41.1% use it for exercise and recreation. And so, and it was across the board. People from out of town that were there maybe staying or visiting. And then an increasing number of folks. And for the Midwest, this is actually pretty high outside of big cities, but 17% actually commuting to work via this kind of green infrastructure connection. So I will stop there and would love to hear questions from you guys about that. No? Good? You got it all? You soaked it up?
Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia. Way back, period next big convention was in, talking about Pittsburgh and how they bring so much sort of creative living space and this brings in business. Any perspective on that?
So, we haven't really looked a whole lot at what Pittsburgh's doing. Sorry, I apparently have a microphone in my chest. But yeah, the idea is that the synergies that exist with this kind of transformation of our streetscapes, if you will, is that if you can actually, renovate, let's say, in the warehouse district, there's a lot of renovation happening. If you tie this all together, you get, instead of them paying $7 for the building work and we're paying $7 for the streetscape work, we each pay $5 because we're able to tie some of those systems together and we get a benefit that yields much more because we were able to take advantage of those synergies. And there's also a benefit to kind of only digging up the street once, right? Like if you're going to put new utilities in, you're going to do other things like that. You'd love to coordinate redevelopment of adjacent land with the work that the city's going to be doing so that we can maximize that benefit and do things like that. But in terms of, you were talking about housing?
More actually public areas.
Okay. Certainly, yeah. I mean, one of the other things that we're looking at in terms of access to, the data for years has shown that if you're within a quarter mile of a kind of a well-maintained programmed green space or open space, one, it increases your property value, but it also increases your happiness and how you rate your own quality of life. So there are kind of larger regional parks that may have more amenities that are important to have kind of throughout the built environment, but certainly, a pocket park where younger children can play or a community garden that has some kind of public-facing features to it certainly have measurable benefits to the community. Go ahead.
I have a question about the water runoff. It's kind of you in there. So how far along are you with slowing the rain runoff? And would this be like a city kind of
So we're just in the planning phase, really, of this. And we'll, hopefully in the not-too-distant future, have a consent decree that, kind of defines the timeline and the other parameters. But the green infrastructure approach, by and large, is something that looks like it's a go-ahead. In terms of, so what was the second?
So the other thing is zoning. I mean, zoning is everything. How a city zones something
Right.
determines everything.
Right.
So I'm just curious about, are you taking that zoning route, in terms of slowing the water?
So in our program development on the solution side, we still have a bunch of options out there. The solution that we're proposing now is to use public right-of-way to solve the issue with stormwater runoff and solve the combined sewer overflow issue. And so in that regard, it doesn't force someone or create a standard that requires someone to do something additional on the property. However, we certainly have the option of looking at, well, could we create an option for private development to actually help solve the problem? And so, you make an agreement with them so that they agree to continue and maintain this stormwater feature that's part of their site design. That's an option, and certainly so is the idea of increasing kind of storage requirements or encouraging properties. The one thing that we've certainly talked about is taking our ordinances and putting in additional resources in addition to, you can put a detention basin in, or you could do naturalized detention or any number of other green infrastructure practices and get these additional benefits, and here are resources for those, or a reference standard or some additional examples. So that's something we definitely want to move forward with because there's no harm there, and it's only going to benefit the city in the long run. Okay. Thank you very much.